And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Paul Elder, who's had 5 near-death experiences, which we're going to learn about and more. Paul, thank you for joining me and welcome.
My pleasure, Jeff. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. And if you don't mind, can we start with a little bit of your backstory before we get into your first NDE?
Probably the best way to get into the backstory is to, I am the 10th out of 11 kids in a family. It's redundant to say we were Catholic. So this is going back a long way. My mother had 8 girls in a row and figured out what was happening, and she changed it on and had 3 boys. And I'm the 10th out of 11. And so we grew up in a small farm in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan, Canada, just above the Montana border. And it was one of those situations where when you grow up that way, poorer than church mice kind of thing, I wouldn't have believed any of this. But what happened in my background, if you will, is certain things happened that brought me into a world that I would have not possibly have anticipated. So the near-death experiences were the most significant, probably. And if you wish, I can get right into discussion about the near-death experiences.
Sure, we can go right to your first one.
Back on the prairies in Saskatchewan, this is a long, long time ago, mid-60s, when I was 12 years old, our cousins from the big city of Edmonton came to visit on a Saturday. My little brother and I joined them, and we were out chasing, I don't know what, gophers or rabbits or something, somewhere on the prairies. And we got to a couple of miles from our farmhouse, and we came upon this pond where the neighbor's kids or somebody had left an abandoned raft from the pond. And my brother and I couldn't swim a lick. And in fact, we had been warned by our parents to stay away from these ponds or dugouts, we call them on the prairies. And at any rate, we're four of us assembled on this raft on this 15-foot deep pond. And my older cousin thought it would be really a lot of fun to rock the raft, especially when he found out that my little brother and I were terrified of water and couldn't swim. And so he was rocking the raft. And if you wonder why you've had no bad luck in your life, it's because Murphy lives with me. And so I fell in the water. And, it's really strange now, but I didn't even have the presence of mind to dog paddle. It was just instant panic, and I'm done. And I began to sink in the water. And as I floated down, or began to sink deeply into the bottom of the pond, and eventually I felt my feet sink into the mud at the bottom. And then I must have kicked or something or pushed, because I floated back up towards the top. And I could tell it was up to the top because the water was a lot lighter. Not sure if my head broke the surface or not. But then I started to drift back down. And an interesting thing happened. And I always had this notion about what drowning would be like. And practically everybody has had this experience at some point in your life, where whether you're a kid or whatever, and you're in the water, in a swimming pool or in the lake or in the ocean, and you gulp in a huge gulp of water, and you can't get your breath, and that instant panic that takes over. Well, and this was the strangest thing, when all of the air went out as I'm drifting down or sinking down to the bottom of the pond a second time, and all the air went out, and all the water came in, completely replacing the air. And it was surprising. It was really amazing to me, because there was absolutely no discomfort. I was totally relaxed. In fact, confused and wondering why it wasn't such a big discomfort. And it was totally peaceful. And it makes sense, because we spent the first 9 months of our lives in a liquid environment. And you're still breathing like normal, only it's water that's going in and out. Okay. But you can only do that for a minute or two before all the oxygen is gone, and you move into unconsciousness, which is what happened to me. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I was actually surprised that I wasn't concerned or fighting it. And I'm not sure how long I was gone unconsciously, but a few minutes or a couple of moments later, or minutes later, I woke up or became aware again with a startled reflex. Like, whoa, but I was still in the water. And now I'm on my knees in the mud in the bottom of this pond. But everything's changed. And I was in it like a bubble of energy, a big bubble around me. And inside this bubble was every color in the rainbow. And it was so amazing to me. I'd never experienced anything like this. In fact, as a 12-year-old, I'm thinking, that's so weird. I didn't know you could feel colors. And green felt different than blue, and blue felt different than orange. And I was waving my hands through these colors inside my perception of a bubble. And some of the colors even penetrated my body. And it was so strange to feel these different vibrations associated with different colors. And then I began to think, whoa, wait a minute. This is weird. Am I dead? Or am I dying? And at 12 years old, I didn't know anybody who died. I had no experience with that at all. But about 3 weeks before that, I had read the book Tom Sawyer. And in the book Tom Sawyer, we're at the part where he's believed to have drowned in the Mississippi or something, and he returns back to the back of a church for his memorial service or something like that. And I recalled that. And almost instantly, I went shooting out of the water. And the next moment, I know I'm floating above the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country, big old church, floating above the fuse in the choir loft on the second floor, looking down over this church and thinking, oh my God, Tom Sawyer didn't fly, I am flying. And it was so cool. And I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute, if this is my funeral, where is everybody? My mom and dad would probably be here. My brothers and sisters would be here. But this whole experience of flying was so mind-blowing, incredible. And a couple of times I even floated over the edge of the choir loft where it's 16 feet down to the floor. And it was like, ooh, that's a little scary. And at some point, while I'm just marveling at this, holy crap, all of a sudden, it was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. And the next thing I know, I'm on the shore of this pond, and my cousin has me upside down, and my face is in the mud, and he's pumping the water out of me. And apparently I'd been in the water for 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, something like that. They really didn't know. But there was a lot of panic about it. So and it took a couple of minutes to get all the water out and the discomfort, but I was totally amazed. And we're sitting there around this pond, the 4 of us with eyes this big, because we just had a weird thing happen, especially for me. And then we made an agreement that we'd never tell another person because we'd get in big trouble back on the farm with German Catholic parents and so on and so forth. And so then we waited for about a half hour and walked really slow on the way home, this 2-mile little trek or whatever it was, so that our clothes would dry off. And on the way back home, I'm telling my cousin Brian, who saved my life, about what happened, about floating in the choir loft. And he was like, Tom Sawyer? Jesus, we thought you were dead. And so I learned that this wasn't necessarily acceptable to other people's processing system. So didn't mention it much after that. But anyway, we arrived home to the yard, and I kind of stayed out in the yard because I had a lot of processing to do. This was so amazing to me. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, I heard some kayang and cussing in German coming out of our farmhouse. And 2 kids got a good whipping on that day, and I was one of them. That'll teach me to die, right? Seriously. It was such a really bizarre thing to have happened. And I did not realize until probably years later, how that has so substantially changed me and my thoughts on living and everything else. And it's problematic because guess what? So as you mentioned, I have had 5 near-death experiences. So I've died 5 times. Now, I think where does this come from? Why 5? Some people would ask that. 5 times? Oh my God. And say, well, yeah, that's because if you show a farm boy, a 12-year-old farm boy, that there's no such thing as dead, that's dangerous. It's like, hold my beer, watch this. What's the worst that could happen? It really is, seriously. It opens the door to a whole bunch of crazy activity or challenging yourself, because if you're convinced that there's no such thing as death. And so I didn't realize for years, until years later, really how that had changed me. But on looking back over it, and my sisters can all vouch for this, I seem to have developed an ability to see things in my mind. And so if things were missing, I would hear my sister say, well, ask Paul. Because I seem to be able to see things in my mind. I have no idea why. And which caused them to think sometimes that I was the one who took it. And sometimes I was, because that's how you build your own legend. Let me see. Yeah, look in the garage. Right? So, but one of the things that perhaps even more substantially changed my thought process about life and who we really are. Are we these bodies, or are we consciousness? What are we? Was about 2 years later, when I was 14 years old, now living a crazy life, challenging everything. And this one Saturday, I'm walking home from my cousin's house, about half a mile from our house, and past the Catholic Church, the same Catholic Church that I had envisioned flying in or floating in. And it was a big old Catholic church on a probably 5-acre property with ball diamonds and things like that. And we had been not forced, but had been expected to or encouraged to be altar boys, my little brother and I. And so we would hear at church, because we had to do the confession thing on Friday night, and sometimes there were, for church on Sunday, and get ready for that. And so Sunday morning, I remember we would hear what was a couple of wild turkeys that were living in the yard. And we could hear them gobbling and scooping along the ground and stuff like that. And on my way back from my cousin's house, came past the churchyard, and there was a stand of a bunch of trees that were probably 60 feet high, 50 feet, 60 feet high. And up on the top of one of these trees was a huge nest. And I didn't know that turkeys couldn't fly. So in my brain, I'm thinking, that's probably the turkey nest. And so I go crawling up this tree from branch to branch and making my way through it until I am just below the nest. And I've actually here's the big nest above me, and I've got my hands on a branch on either side of the nest. Now we're into the small branches. And I'm standing on my tiptoes on the branch below, trying to look up into and pull myself up to look in the nest. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if there's a turkey in it and it pecks me in the face? And so I pull back a little bit, and then I'm thinking, no, there could be baby turkeys in there. And, like I say, it was probably an eagle's nest. So at any rate, I am trying and pulling like this with all my might to pull and look inside this nest. And all of a sudden, the branch that I'm standing on just snapped right off. It broke, and I went falling through that tree, and probably about 10 feet or 12 feet below that, hit a branch and got knocked unconscious, rolling around. And the next thing I know, as I'm going down through the tree, hitting branches, next thing I know, I'm floating in the tree, watching myself fall through the tree, hitting the branches. And I finally landed on my back, unconscious, on the ground below, and it knocked the wind out of me. And I'm floating in the tree, thinking, get up. I'm looking down at myself, and thinking, how is this? And suddenly I woke up, or became, regained consciousness, and I'm laying on my back with the wind knocked out of me, looking up into this tree, thinking, what the hell just happened? How is that possible? I was in the tree watching myself, my body, fall out of the tree, which made me think of a terrible old pun, that boy ain't been out of the tree very long. And but it really drove home the whole thing, that we're not these bodies. Our consciousness exists outside of the body. And that maybe we come and we spend some time inside these bodies. So that really, really changed my perspective. And in fact, it made it worse, more dangerous in terms of taking risks and going after things. So many years later, or not many years later, when I was 17, I was a hockey player and an athlete, and I got smashed up really bad in a car accident. There was 3 of us, my 2 cousins and I, in a car, and at 85 miles an hour, this 1964 Ford went end over end into a ditch in Saskatchewan, Canada, in mid-November, where it's about at the end of November, where it was probably, I think, around that time, almost 15 or 20 below outside, and we're in the middle of nowhere, and got knocked unconscious, all 3 of us. I had a cracked skull, my right ear almost torn off, a ruptured kidney, broken ribs, and a punctured lung. And somehow, during that process, I would be freezing cold, laying out on, in the snow-covered field. My 2 buddies were also not thrown out of the vehicle and laying on the ground. I wasn't aware of them. In fact, I couldn't recall where I was or what I was doing there, but I became aware that I'm really cold. And then I felt something or someone. It was like putting a blanket on me. And I realized that it wasn't at all until, much later on, I learned more about what that was. It was like there was some energy that was keeping me warm, but it was like a conscious energy, waking me up and getting my attention so that I could see, because I was probably 100, 200 feet from the road, from this grid road or dirt road out in the country, so that I could see the headlights of a car that was probably going to be the only car that would be coming by that night. Like I said, we were out in the boonies completely. So it woke me up enough to get me to crawl out to the road, and I got there just in time to flag down this car as it was zipping by on this gravel road. And I remember the gravel flying, and the guy hit the brakes, and they backed up, and whoa, okay, we'll call the cops, we'll get help. And so they took off. And this was like 1967, 68, I can't remember. I headed back into the field, completely forgetting, or I stumbled over one of my buddies who was unconscious, and checked on both of them, and they both seemed to be dead. And I'm not sure how much longer after that, but then I became aware of lights approaching on the highway or on the grid road, and there's flashing lights, and a police car arrived, and then ambulances, and they took us all 3 off to the hospital. And the closest, this was out in the middle of nowhere. The closest town, or little town out there, was a town known as Biggar, 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 Saskatchewan. What stands out about that is that they have a sign, their town sign on the outside of the town. Says their town sign said, "This is New York is big, but this is bigger." Seriously, and it's there to this day. So I remember seeing that, and got to the hospital, and the doctor began to work on me, and most of my right ear a lot of my right ear had been torn off, and I had a big, long cut on the top of my head from a a cracked skull or something, and went into a coma for 3 days or something like that. Completely didn't know where I was or didn't recall any of it until like 2 weeks later. But I woke up in the hospital 2 or 3 days later, and they had, in those days, they still have these kind of like things that go over top of the bed that have a little panel on them. You can, for eating meals, and you can flip it up. And well, this thing was beside the bed, and I'm thinking, where the heck am I? This is like a hospital. And I pulled the thing over and I flipped up the mirror, and I was shocked. Because back in those days, we're talking 1967, I had a beetle haircut, so I had a long haircut. And what had happened is they had shaved the top of my head to put all these stitches in. And I looked like a monk. I was like, what the hell have they done to me? Where am I? Couldn't recall anything. But became familiar later on with that feeling of that spirit or energy that was with me in the ditch that caused me to wake up or kept me warm so that we could get out of there. So moving on then, that was when I was 17. It got me out of my hockey career, and because I had a ruptured kidney as well. So over the years, I did a whole bunch of different things. Got into broadcasting, the disc jockey back in the rock and roll days, and then got into television and radio news, and spent 10 years in that business in the mainstream media. And when I got out of that, I got into politics, and actually was the mayor of a small city in Saskatchewan called Swift Current. And we're talking like 15, 18,000 people. 80% Mennonite, basically fundamental Christian, right? We had about the lowest crime rate in the entire country, that kind of thing. But I got involved in politics and operating the city and that sort of thing. And I was still playing hockey. I was playing old timers hockey. Old timers at the age of 40, right? And it was a really funny thing because by then I had a wife and 2 kids. And when a certain event happened, I had a heart attack in the middle of a hockey game and died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And it was pretty bizarre because not 3 weeks before that, my wife had been giving me heck because we had a friend who had a school teacher who died playing floor hockey, had a heart attack and died on the floor. And then we had another friend, Bernie, I think it was, who had a heart attack but didn't die, around the same time. And my wife was giving me heck, was like, you're not 20 anymore, you're 40. What are you trying to kill yourself? And I'm thinking, because we were weekend warriors. During the week, we're sitting on our butts in an office, and on the weekend, we're out roughing it up in a hockey rink somewhere, doing old timers tournaments and things like that. And so this was all so bizarre to me. But when I realized this in the middle of the hockey game while we were playing, and suddenly I could hardly breathe, and my elbow, there was a lot of pain in my elbow, and I thought, whoa, what's going on? And pretty soon it became evident that I was in trouble. But in reality, I basically passed out in the rink after I got my equipment off, thank goodness. Passed out in the rink, and a rink attendant came by and saw me slumping or laying on the floor in the rink, and called an ambulance. And next thing I know, I'm scooting away in an ambulance, and this young lady is the ambulance attendant or paramedic asking me questions and so on and so forth. And while she was doing that, I drifted away. And I don't know how long I was gone, but it was like, boom, with a jolt, I'm back in. And I began to feel myself lifting. I had no perception that this wasn't my physical body. It seemed like I'm lifting up off the floor of this of the ambulance until I'm at the ceiling looking down, watching this gal shuffling an oxygen mask on my face and that sort of thing. And then I'm thinking, I remembered, and I thought, oh, this is not good. And I remembered, and I thought, oh, Candy is going to be so pissed off because she warned me. So I thought about her and the kids, and the next thing I know, I am floating in my house, watching them get ready for church on a Sunday. And I thought, yeah, I probably should have stayed home and gone to church. So I actually was finding myself saying goodbye to them. I knew everything would be okay, and they'd be all right, but I'm going home. And the next thing I know, boom, I'm back floating in the ambulance, and I'm saying goodbye to me. And then one of the strangest things happened. I began to float up as if it was time to go, and I floated up through the ceiling of the ambulance, and I could feel, this was so bizarre, I could feel every layer. I could feel the cloth and the interior and the insulation, and then the metal as I passed through this all, until I'm like floating 10 feet above the ambulance, watching it boogieing along through the town to the hospital, and thinking, I'm going home. And my perspective changed. Everything turned dark, and it was like there was a spot of light in front of me somewhere. And I'm streaking through from the darkness in towards this light. And the only thing I could describe it as, if you recall the movie E.T., where, from years and years ago, where E.T. is in a coffin-like thing, and then the spaceship comes back, and his heart lights up, and he goes, home, 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 home. And that's what I felt like, is I'm going home. And I was so excited, I'm going home. And I'm streaking along, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm in the hospital emergency room, and it shocked me back into, or pulled me back into my body. And I did not want to be there. So that was the first thing that changed a whole lot of things, or the biggest thing. After that, I began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences, where I'd find myself at the ceiling of my bedroom looking down at myself and my wife in bed and going, holy smoke, wow, this is so cool. The first time that I'd ever heard about such a thing, I had probably around 1981, I think, or 1982. I'd been watching a television interview with this guy named Robert Monroe. And in this interview, they were talking about this book he had written called Journeys Out of the Body. And I thought, that's interesting. So I borrowed it from the library, never bought it. I just went to the library, borrowed this book, read it from cover to cover, and took it back. And I thought, that is really cool and interesting, but this guy's a nut job. Well, now it's like 10 years later, and I'm floating at the ceiling of my bedroom, thinking, holy crap, Monroe wasn't crazy. So the very next day after that first out-of-body experience that I had, I headed back to the library, and I found out that Bob Monroe had written another book called Far Journeys. And in that book, he talked about this facility that he had created in Virginia, which had become a world leader in consciousness research. And they had developed and created a patented process of a creation of sound frequencies that were actually patented and approved, in independent laboratories that proved that they could move people into profoundly deep states of consciousness. In Monroe's terminology, with mind awake and body asleep. And I thought, I have got to find out about this. So I registered or signed up for the first program, a gateway program that I could attend, and went to the Monroe Institute and had profoundly amazing, life-changing experiences as well. Got to know Bob Monroe, and we hit it off. I attended a number of programs over the next few months, and Bob and I, became friends and hit it off. And he was, in particular, he was interested in the fact because he was in broadcasting too, back in the earlier years before, when it was just radio, before television came along. And he was one of the first pioneers who purchased and owned a cable television company too. But Bob was an executive producer for a company that created radio shows back in the 50s and 60s. And he began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences, much like I did. But he pursued it, and he wrote books about it, and he actually created this patented process of exploring your own consciousness or frequencies called hemisync or hemispheric synchronization. And so he began to, given our joint interest in things like that, Bob wanted me to become a trainer at the Monroe Institute. So he would encourage me, asking me, well, you need, and I was like, Bob, at the time I owned an insurance brokerage firm. I have a degree in insurance and contract law, and I was the mayor of a city, running a city. And I was like, Bob, I'm way too busy. I haven't got time for that. And he would, push me and encourage me. So around 1995, Bob died. I think he was 80 or 81. And one of the first programs I was down there, the first time I was down there after Bob's funeral, his daughter, Lori, had taken over the company. And she called me into her office and she sat me down and she said, Daddy always said you'd be a good trainer. Oh gosh. Okay. All right. Let's do it. It was like a message from Bob. So, longer story short, I became a trainer at the Monroe Institute. I got to, having said that, I should back up a little bit. I got to spend some time in the special isolation chamber that Bob had created when Bob was still alive. And back through the years, I had done various different kinds of processes, including, brain mapping and so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking rudimentary kind of stuff, back in the early 90s or whatever. But I got to spend some time in this isolation chamber, special chamber that they had created that was, it had a water bed in it, heated to body temperature, and you could just sink into it and put the headphones on and listen to this special hemisync sounds. And some of the things I experienced and some of the things I told them about or shared with Bob and this one of the techie guys, which is a fellow named Skip Atwater. And then I find, anyway, I'm introduced to some people who are talking about really strange things, including the former Pentagon director of this top secret program known as Stargate. And then I find out that this guy named Skip, this lab techie that Bob hired, his name used to be Captain Fred Atwater, and he was the manager of this top secret program at Fort Meade in Maryland called remote viewing or Stargate. And it was all mind-blowing to me because I was like, I don't know that I believed them. They thought I might have some abilities in it. And so I was like, I might have been born on the farm, but it wasn't yesterday. And it just seemed like such a strange thing. Anyway, longer story short, I spent time training and learning and became a remote viewing trainer at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, along with Captain Atwater for a period of 10 years, and taught remote viewing program there and helped out on different things with intelligence services and stuff like that. So that sort of brings us to date.
I'm only counting 4 NDEs. Did I miss one?
Oh, no, there is 5.
All right.
These are more longer stories, if you will. Let's see here. The 5th one was, I had another heart attack about 10 years after the first one. But it was minor, and so nothing really happened. It was a waste of time, right? And so in 2006, after I was a trainer at the Institute in Virginia and working on training programs and so on and so forth, at around 6 in the morning this one weekend, I woke up and and could hardly breathe and could feel a pain in my chest, and went to the washroom, and it was like somebody poured hot water in both of my armpits. And I thought, oh, no, I haven't got time for this. So I knew it was coming. So my girlfriend takes me to the hospital, and in Port Alberni, British Columbia, on Vancouver Island. And while I was there, it was strange because it was like 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning. He was actually a heart specialist in the hospital. And this lady doctor, they've got me laying there with intravenous going and all sorts of things happening. And she's asking me questions. And somehow in the middle of that, I lost consciousness. And it wasn't, I don't think it was very long, but it was, while I'm talking to her, answering, she's asking questions, and all of a sudden, like, and I'm gone. I come back and, whoa. And she goes, whoa, 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 tell us what's happening. You're the doctor, you tell me. I just went bye-bye for a minute. But it was interesting because that was sort of like a big, within 10 minutes, there was a medevac helicopter at the hospital in Victoria, in Port Alberni, in the smaller town. And it flew me to the cardiac center in the capital city in the province, Victoria, here on the island. And strangely enough, while I was at the cardiac center in Victoria, of course, they were trying to figure out what is causing all of this, because other than that, I'm basically a pretty healthy individual. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on with this heart stuff. And so what they were planning is doing an angiogram. This is the day that I arrived. They're going to do it the next morning. They're going to, so I'm put up in the hospital overnight. And I don't know if they didn't pay attention to my hospital records or other records or whatever, but I'm not sure if they made assumptions. One of them being that people that have this condition usually have high blood pressure. And so apparently I was given, apparently I was given medication to lower my blood pressure, which is the opposite for me. I have low, healthy blood pressure. And all of my life, when I was a hockey player at 20 years old, my heart rate, or my heartbeat at relaxed, was 44 beats a minute. And even now, I range in like 55, 56 to 60 beats a minute, which is pretty low. And my blood pressure always has been like 90 over 60, 100 over 70, so healthy range. So at any rate, I'm in the special care unit, in the emergency unit, being prepared for this angiogram they're going to do the next day. That's where they put a cable up into your heart, or a camera, and take a look to see where the blockages are, or where the problems might be. Well, at some point overnight, I found myself having a very vivid dream. And in my dream, I'm back somewhere in Saskatchewan riding my dirt bike across the field after a rain, nice green grass, and zooming around rocks and doing wheelies and everything else, and just really having a good time. And all of a sudden, the horn on my bike beeps. And I'm what is, and I'm pushing the button in my dream. What is going on with this stupid horn? And all of a sudden, I feel a shift, and I'm floating at the ceiling in the hospital, watching or looking down as the monitor, the heart monitor, is going beep, 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 which pulled me out of my dream. And one of a male nurse attendant or whatever, came into the room and looked over at me and my body, because I'm floating at the ceiling. And then he went over beside this heart rate or heart machine or monitor, and he looked at it, and he checked the cables and even whacked it on the side once or twice. And then he came over and he shook me. I was like, boom, I'm back in my body. And I went, man, why did you do that? And he says, your heart rate was down to 14 beats a minute. I said, well, yeah, but I was having some fun. So that triggered a bunch of things. And I'm imagining or guessing that he then left quickly And I think he probably went to phone a doctor to see what the deal is, to tell him what's the next step, what are they going to do. So overnight, and at some point, I'm not sure when it was, whether that was a few hours later, at some point overnight I died, or at least that was my impression of it. I found myself at some point floating out of my body, thinking, oh, here we go, time to go home. And a couple of my spirit guides, some lady spirits, if you will, were going to give me an experience or to help me with this. And one of them, in my perception, touched me here. And there's like a little bit of pressure, and the next thing I felt like I was falling, like I was just this little bitty piece of consciousness falling through the universe. And my impression of it was that it was like a drop of water. And it seemed to take forever that I'm falling and falling and falling, until finally it was like this drop of water that fell into the ocean and like spread out through the entire ocean. And at first it was so chaotic. It was like I could hear the sounds of everything. And I've discovered since then that that's essentially where we are, who we are. We are, if we were to compare it, when somebody says, well, okay, what is God? Where is God? And I say, if you want to see God, look in the mirror. The reality that I've learned after many, or 5 out-of-body or near-death experiences and many out-of-body experiences, the simile that I like to use is, imagine that we are the individual drops of water in the ocean, but we're connected to the entire ocean. And each of us has the DNA and the blueprint for the entire ocean. So as a collective consciousness, we are the creator collectively. And so this was my experience as I'm dying and falling into this, and my consciousness spread out into, at first, like I say, it was so chaotic. It's like I could hear the sounds and voices, some people screaming, yelling, begging, all sorts of things. Every sound that was taking place became so chaotic and I wanted it to quit. And finally, it started to change until it became the most amazing symphony of beautiful sounds that I'd ever heard. It's like right through, echoing through the universe was this beautiful symphony orchestra. And then things changed, and it was like I was connecting with every other possibility of consciousness, maybe in the universe, or at least in our planet. And I experienced connecting to everything. Now, this is going to be hard because I don't know how long this took place or how long it was happening, but it could be only seconds. But my experience was so profound, experiencing everything, and I cannot articulate or cannot possibly remember all of the things that I experienced, or because it was just so deep. It might have been billions of connections. But the things that stood out in my mind were, for a moment, in my memory, I was a whale in the ocean experiencing this, and it was sort of like connecting with all the other drops of water in the ocean, and I had the distinct feeling of the tail going through the ocean as I'm swimming along. I have a memory of being a tree, a huge old tree, and actually hearing myself breathing. So, I mean, so many of these things came, at the same time, so it's impossible to, in the left brain, to recall it or deal with it. But strangely enough, the most powerful and the most significant of all of these billions of little connections was I suddenly was aware or became a puppy. And I'm chasing after what probably was a 2-year-old in a diaper outside. 2-year-old, all that had was a diaper. And I'm chasing after this 2-year-old across a green lawn, trying to get another sniff of this poopy diaper. And I experienced It was like the most powerful experience of absolute joy and elation that this puppy had, just running behind this little guy trying to get another sniff, and was the most incredible feeling of, of joy that I've ever had. So many things passed through my mind. That's the one that stands out the most. And eventually, at some point, I felt myself withdrawing, pulling out of this, all of this noise or all of these other sounds and experiences. And the next thing I know, I'm back in my body, in the hospital. And truly perplexing, truly, astonishing. So that's the crux of it.
I'm not really clear on why some of the sounds were so chaotic. Can you explain that to me, please?
Sure. Imagine if you are, because we are connected to everything. So imagine you walk into a convention floor where everybody's talking. That was the feeling. It was like just background noise that's connecting to everything. Some of it resonating, some of it hearing words, some of it just hearing noise. It was just such a powerful, but chaotic, like too much noise. Go away, stop.
So that was due to your initial connection.
Right.
All right.
Right.
That makes sense.
And also then, when I overcame that revulsion of that, and then I began to have the visual sense of it and the actual connection with everything, which included the puppy and everything else that you can imagine. But I try to get my mind around this, because if we're connected to everything, and I had all of these experiences of connecting to all consciousness, how do we, and the whole experience might have been just a few seconds long in physical reality, but it's like a download. So how do we differentiate between all of these, when we are there? And that's, I think, who we really are on the other side, is we are conscious beings connected to the consciousness of everything else. But when we're used to it, or when we're living in it, we have, because when I get back to this side, to the physical world, it's the left brain that I got to try to rely on to remember all of that stuff. And it's, fairly inadequate.
Do you think you can give us any more information about your spirit guides? Like what she looked like, what her name was?
Well, I can, but what's happened is it's changed. My spirit guide, and you have to understand, I would not have believed this. Even 30 years ago or whatever, I wouldn't have believed a single word I'm telling you. At some point after the heart attack in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, in the ambulance, I began to have out-of-body experiences and began to explore consciousness. And I discovered, because I'd heard people talk about spirit guides and things like that, and I thought, wow, where? And so what happened at, I think the first or second program that I attended at the Monroe Institute, when I met my spirit guide. And this is a fairly rare occurrence from what I understand. It seems to me, and what I've learned after these near-death experiences and hundreds of out-of-body experiences and remote viewing experiences and so on and so forth, it seems to me that who we are, and we come here to have a physical experience. If we want easy, we stay on the other side. Essentially, we come here to incarnate, to get our asses kicked and our hearts broken. Because guess what? Then we know we're alive. And that experience is really powerful. And it seems like, from what I understand, we travel in families of souls. So this time, you might be the son. Last time, you might have been the father, or even the sister or brother. And we travel in families of souls, going through this by agreement with each other. And we make agreements with the rest of our family of souls to come along and play a role in our lives collectively. And it's for the experience. And we also make an agreement with that soul who's going to come along and push every damn button we have. And we all know who that is, right? But in addition to that, what I discovered is that we're also a part of a soul group. And this can be a very large group of souls that are so like us in vibration and harmony that we could literally end up in one of their bodies and not know the difference. So in my case, to put some clarity to this, in my case, there apparently are 14 of us in our soul group, which apparently is fairly small. There are 4 of us that are incarnated right now. And the other 10 remain on the other side, but they get to experience our lives, the lives of the 4 that are living. And when we sleep or when we move through different levels of consciousness, the 4 that are here, we sometimes get to experience the lives of the other 3 that are incarnated now. So everybody's had experiences like that where you have a dream and it's just like so confusing, but it makes total sense when you're having it, but then afterwards, what? What was that? That wasn't my wife. That wasn't my house. You somehow connected with the body of one of the other people that are incarnated at the time. So we go through this process, if you will. And where the spirit guides come in, we also make agreement with the spirit guide to come along and make sure that happens the way we wanted it. All right. So if you have your spirit guide working with somebody else's spirit guide to make sure that, and like I said, we come here for the tough stuff. We want easy, we stay over there. So it's sort of like when we get back to the other side after this lifetime or whatever, whether we're worn out or what, our spirit guides are like, holy crap, that was so cool that time when you hit the wall. Whoa, it was, they get to experience that too. But them working together collectively, they make the connections to happen. Well, apparently for me, I had agreed to do a number of things, or had wanted to pursue a number of things, but I may have been procrastinating or pushing it off or something like that, or not accepting it. And so my spirit guide, whose name was Meldor, came along, and it was like he was a very powerful male presence, male vibration. And he was hilariously funny. And he came along as plan B to get my attention. Sort of like slap me upside the head, wake the hell up. You wanted to do this, now we're going to do it. And it took him to get my attention to those things. After I met him, I had an experience where he's basically trying to explain to me or convince me that he's been here all along, and showed me experiences in an out-of-body experience in my mind when I was laying in that ditch, frozen at 17 years old, that he was there. He's the one who got me to wake up, sort of thing. He's the one who screamed at me while I'm driving back and forth to British Columbia on the highway, just to make trips home to Saskatchewan that took 2 days, driving in my car and falling asleep as I'm wandering off the lane in towards a semi-trailer in the mountains, and all of a sudden somebody screamed at me, "Wake up!" And I pretty much almost forgotten about it, but it was like, that was you. So keeping me in line with things like that. The person, many experiences with my spirit guide Meldor, helping out, guiding me, and so on and so forth. And I wrote about it in my book. The name Meldor seems really bizarre, but he used that name. And it was, by the way, it was before the movie came out, or the early movies that I can't remember the name of right now, with Muldor, or Mulder, or whatever it was, and I can't think of the name of the movie.
When you were with Bob at the Monroe Institute, did you ever encounter beings while out of your body that Bob talks about? especially the ones that are out there that feed off our energy?
No, I have encountered beings, but there, from what my experience is, there may be souls like that. All right. Souls who have passed over, but maybe, you see, the reality is if you pass on, maybe you're an alcoholic or you're a drug addict, and then one day you die. You're still an alcoholic or a drug addict until you're sort of rejuvenated the other side, and your spirit guides and your loved ones come along to collect you. All right. Some take a little bit longer because they're hanging on to that. All right. You may remember the movie Ghost, where with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, and the ghost that was down in the trolley system, and he wanted to smoke so damn bad. All right. So I've never run into, and I've run into many spirits, if you will. Most of them on the other side. There are, but it's been only a couple of times where I've run into a spirit that is still hanging around the earth because they need a drink or something like that. Right? But there is absolutely, I have not ever run into, there's no spirit that can get into somebody else's body without permission. Just not possible. So, and there is no, and this is one of the things, there is no being or spirit on the other side who is more powerful than you are or anybody else. Right? There's no lording it over somebody else. There's no one. We are equal frequency kind of creatures, if you will, or consciousness.
Were the out-of-body experiences that you had due to binaural beats with Bob the same as you had when you had an NDE?
I think so. Essentially, there's a lot of, the difference is the intent and what we have in our minds, because a near-death experience usually is the result of a pretty dramatic rejection from the body or your body dying. Whereas an out-of-body experience, it might be self-generated or might be accidental or so on and so forth. The feeling can be exactly the same. All right. So, I've had thousands of them, if you will, and never felt, out of place, if you will. At first, it can be scary, but once you understand that there's nothing, absolutely nothing that can hurt you, and here's what scares people, all right? And everybody's had this experience at some point, where every night, as you drift off to sleep, as your brain waves fall from beta into theta and alpha states of consciousness, as you approach the dream state in theta, your body moves into deep sleep or dream paralysis. And this is a natural occurrence that every animal or every creature pretty much on the planet has. It keeps us from acting out our dreams and hurting ourselves or others. All right. So as we drift away, and you can feel that as at night, even as you're falling asleep, everybody has this experience at some point where you're laying there and you're maybe not asleep yet, you're not awake, and you're in between. And you can actually feel a bit of a shift and you're sort of losing it, and it's like a little drop kind of thing. And then you think of something and this little jolt and you're back in your body. That little jolt bringing you back into your body, that's you returning from an out-of-body experience. You're starting to drift away and then boom, you're back.
When you were doing the gateway technique or procedure, would you ever just float up out of your body just like you did during an NDE? And actually, let me follow up with that before you answer. And while you were out there, could you turn around and see your body laying there?
Yes. Yes to all of the above. Essentially what happened, you see, I began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences, as I mentioned. And so I wanted nothing more. Before I made it to that first gateway program in Virginia, there was about a 3-month period where I tried every single night to go out of body to make it happen. But guess what? The harder you try, the more impossible it becomes, because you're in the left brain. It's like sitting there with your foot on the gas pedal to the floor, wondering why you're not slowing down, because you're trying to make that feeling. And so people have this notion of what they call the vibrational. You're going to feel the vibrations mounting in your body and stuff like that. Well, so we try to create that. But as long as we're trying to create it, we're in the left brain. And what has to happen is we make that shift from the left brain into the right hemisphere, which is connected to the rest of the universe. And so people will, for example, when I went that first week to Virginia, after 2.5 days there, I mean, I wanted to have the experience so damn bad. I've been working on it for 3 months. And after 2.5 days of virtually nothing happening, I got to the point and I thought, oh, this is bull. I wasted a whole bunch of money. I wasted a whole week for this crap. There's nothing. And when I let go, when I thought to myself, well, screw it, I'm just going to drift off to sleep here. And guess what? When I let go, and the next thing I know, I'm floating up to the ceiling. So I learned that a very important thing that this is not something you can make happen, generally speaking, without becoming completely relaxed and letting go. But if you're in your left brain trying to make it happen, in fact, it becomes counterproductive, because the harder you try, the more impossible it becomes. So it's letting go, setting up the condition, and the hemisync is amazing in that regard. If you let go and let it take you to deep altered states, and then usually what happens is it sneaks up on you. It's like you're trying to plan it out, but when you let go and you start to drift, and then all of a sudden, whoa, you're floating at the ceiling, you can see your body, or whatever your situation.
A few days ago, I had a video with a pediatrician, a critical care pediatrician that did near-death experience research on children. And we talked about that the interface between your brain and the cosmos is the right temporal lobe. I previously before thought it was the pineal gland, but he's saying it's the right temporal lobe. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, obviously, I'm not a medical person. My perception, I mean, when I had some of the first out-of-body experiences, the perception, or even near-death experiences, the perception was that I'm seeing something here, that the opening to leaving my body was here. So we think, well, third eye, pineal gland, right? But that may not be reality, and I've heard other people talking about it. When I had when I had some very serious or powerful out-of-body experiences, didn't involve that at all. I find myself floating at the ceiling of my room, and so what's happened over the years now, because I still actually do help out with intelligence services occasionally, looking for missing people, looking for bad guys and stuff like that. And generally the way that works in remote viewing, and actually remote viewing is a misnomer, it should be called remote sensing, because in the process of doing that, and we have some specially created hemisync that we use from the Monroe Institute for the remote viewing programs for remote viewers and Stargate and so on and so forth. And typically what happens when I'm working on a project, I might put on my headphones, turn off the lights in my office building or office room, lay on my bed and just listen to the hemisync. And usually at about 9-10 minutes into the process, and when I'm starting to click out or drift away or feel a shift, when that starts to happen, then I know I'm ready. So then I get up and sit down at my desk and I do my remote sensing and remote viewing. But unfortunately, only about 30% of the time, when I get to that stage where I'm starting to feel these little nudges and stuff like that, it's starting to drift away, about 30% of the time, I might suddenly find myself out of body in the shift. I'll feel the shift, and then I'll find myself wherever the target is. And then you can pretty much take it to the bank. It becomes very accurate, right? Because it's not so much working through the left brain anymore. And so there's a good feedback, if you will. And unfortunately, like I say, those only happen about 30% of the time for me.
Would you say that every night when we're dreaming, we are essentially having an out-of-body experience?
Certainly can be. It can be a transfer of consciousness, but it actually can be like a physical perception of separation from the physical body, where you are floating and tented on somewhere else. We never ever lose connection with the physical body. Right? There's always a part of us that's in the physical body, but we can stream back and forth. It's so what part of us is able to do that? And we've all had this experience. You might be sitting out in a park somewhere, or out in the back 40, or in the mall, or wherever it is, and you get the sense that somebody's watching you. And you turn around, and sure enough, there's somebody. What part of you knew that? What part of a mom knows her kid's in trouble 3,000 miles away? That's the part that we connect to, or we move into when we're doing remote viewing, remote sensing, out-of-body experiences, and so on and so forth. So in order to do that, it requires basically relaxing, letting go. Okay. And so, I've lost track of where I'm going with it. Don't ever get old. It sucks.
That's all right. Are you aware if the Gateway program has changed over time? Or is it still the same program as it was when you took it?
Well, I've been a trainer for 25 years now, and I'm familiar with the program for over 30 some years. So no, it hasn't changed. There are maybe some additions that have been added to it, but essentially we're listening to the process that Bob Monroe created is virtually the same. All right? So it's the secondary programs after that, the other programs that were developed after the Gateway process, where we might call it guidelines or lifeline or heartline or all the different programs. That's where the newer stuff was introduced. And today we have some programs. It's become sort of a very advanced process, if you will. We have some sessions or programs where there's many as 15 levels of hemisync going through a single auditory tone. So it's a really powerful thing. But where this becomes kind of exciting, I mean, with AI, artificial intelligence, and the possibilities of that. It's also a scary prospect for certain things, but the possibilities of using AI for consciousness development are really, really cool and really in depth. Meaning that if we could take, using artificial intelligence, it can take us to a place where we can customize hemisync for an individual, almost guaranteeing, monitoring all this person's reactions, all of their person's entries, and so on and so forth, monitoring all of their brain waves and everything else, and then automatically calculating out the best formula to get this person to move into an out-of-body state. And that's a pretty exciting prospect of it. Actual customized hemisync.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Paul, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
I guess.
Well, what's the best way to contact you?
Oh gosh. Well, see, I am semi-retired now. So I used to have a facility here in Vancouver Island in which I did my own. I did Monroe Institute, offered Monroe Institute residential programs here, and frankly, the COVID mess was so hard to operate in, especially up here in socialist British Columbia. It was so difficult to. So I finally retired and sold my facility, and so now I just train programs at the Institute in Virginia, and so basically email. My email address is paul.elder@shaw.ca. The same one that I gave you.
Earlier, you mentioned your book, which I believe is called Eyes of an Angel.
Yes.
If people want to find out more about it, should they go to a website or Amazon?
Well, it's really available all over the place on Amazon and a whole bunch of other. It's out. It's been out now for goodness. It was published in 2005. The publisher wanted 2 more books from me, and right now I'm 7.5 years behind on the second one. It's not like, see, this problem, this crap of having to make a living is interfering with my life. All right, so the one of these days I'm going to get it done. My first book, and I just happen to have one here, is Eyes of an Angel, and so that's a look at it. But it's available in Amazon and bookstores all over the place. So
Before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I think that what I've learned over the years, notwithstanding the pain of getting smashed around in near-death experience and so on and so forth, and having several life reviews or during the process of dying, what I've discovered is that in the final analysis, it won't matter one little bit who won or who lost, or how rich or famous we became, or anything else. The only thing that will matter to us is how we treated others along the way. So, love each other.
Paul, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.